Hello, class, and welcome to our presentation, Aristotle's Theory of Nature. So in this presentation, we will do a brief overview. We will talk about who was Aristotle. Then we'll discuss Aristotle's theory of nature, and then we'll end with a conclusion. So before we can grasp Aristotle's theory of the good life, we must first, one, learn more about who Aristotle was, and understand his theory of nature. So let's begin with the first objective. So who was Aristotle? So to begin with, Aristotle was born in 384 CE in the Greek region of Thrace. And as a young man, he traveled to Athens to study with Plato at the Academy. And over time, Aristotle became Plato's most illustrious student. Now, although Aristotle was profoundly influenced by Plato's philosophy, and even adopted many of his concepts into his own thought, Aristotle disagreed with many of his master's ideas. Well, how so? So as you may recall, Plato was a dualist philosopher, believing in the existence of two parallel realities, whereas Aristotle was a naturalist, arguing for the existence of one material reality. And Plato argued that true knowledge comes from the exercise of pure reason, whereas for Aristotle, knowledge is attained through observation, that is, through observing the natural world. And whereas Plato emphasized mathematics as a form of pure reasoning, Aristotle emphasized study of the natural sciences. And as we know, Plato was anti-democracy, thinking it was the worst form of government. But Aristotle still had faith in democracy and therefore embraced it as one of the better political systems. So you may have seen this painting by the Renaissance painter Raphael. It's called The School of Athens. And if we zoom into the middle, there's Plato and Aristotle. So Plato being the older gentleman and Aristotle being the younger. So Plato, as you can see, is pointing up to the sky, and Aristotle is pointing down to the ground. And this kind of is a symbol of the major difference between them, that Plato believed that, again, true knowledge comes from understanding the forms through pure reason. Then that's why he's pointing up to the heavens. And Aristotle is pointing down, saying, no, 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 like the way that we achieve knowledge is through observing the natural world. So as we can see, although Aristotle was influenced by Plato, there are some major differences between them. Now continuing along, following Plato's death, Aristotle became tutor to the famous Alexander the Great. And eventually Aristotle would come to found his own school in Athens called the Lyceum. And Aristotle died in 322 BCE at the age of 62. So now that we know some things about Aristotle's life and how he is both similar and different to Plato, let's talk about his theory of nature. So to begin with, and we kind of covered this already, Aristotle adhered to the naturalist school of thought. So unlike his mentor Plato, Aristotle did not find dualism convincing. Rather, Aristotle believed that there existed a single material reality composed of several ultimate substances. So not only was he a naturalist, but he also belonged to the pluralist schools of thought, like Empedocles. Secondly, Aristotle argued for what is called a teleological theory of nature. And the term teleological comes from the Greek word telos, which means end. So a teleological theory of nature argues that nature has an inherent purpose, function, or end. And what is the end or goal of a natural thing? To become itself. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, we will hopefully clarify that toward the end of this presentation. And the third and final teaching, everything in the world is comprised of form and matter. Now, we already talked about what form meant to the philosopher Plato, but what does form mean according to Aristotle? Well, for Aristotle, form is the internal essence or blueprint of a thing. So like Plato, Aristotle acknowledged that all natural things follow an ideal form. However, Aristotle argued that form exists within nature as opposed to outside of nature. Now, some modern commentators think that Aristotle was way ahead of the game, and they think that he is arguing for some kind of ancient Greek form of genetics. That is, he was somehow kind of aware that the principle of genetics existed. So some believe that, again, that Aristotle is referring clearly to genetics, that all things have a genetic code and they grow and develop according to that genetic code. Whereas others say, no, 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 Aristotle was actually referring to something much more abstract, and that if he were alive today, he would distinguish between what he meant by form and what is meant by genetics. So just a fun fact to be aware of. So we know what Aristotelian form is, so what is matter? So matter refers to the material stuff that comprises reality. So like Empedocles, Aristotle argued for the existence of four ultimate material substances, earth, air, fire, and water, which when combined create the various phenomenon in our natural world. So put simply, all natural things in the universe are comprised of form and matter. They are comprised of material stuff, and they grow and develop by following an internal form or ideal blueprint. Now, to explain this theory of form and matter, Aristotle uses this famous acorn and the oak tree example. So let's review it. So Aristotle says, okay, let's take into consideration the function of an acorn and what it's comprised of. So an acorn is comprised of matter, so it's comprised of material stuff, and it is comprised of form, meaning that it contains somewhere within it some kind of an internal blueprint of what it is supposed to be. And if we could actually have a pair of special glasses that allowed us to look into the form of an acorn, what we would see is a blueprint of an ideal, perfect oak tree. Now remember, Aristotle adhered to a teleological theory of nature. So he argues that all things in nature, including an acorn, has some kind of an inherent purpose or function. And that purpose or function is to develop into its ideal blueprint, to actually become an oak tree. So if an acorn is eaten, let's say, by a squirrel, then it has failed to adhere to its purpose. It has kind of fallen short. It has not realized its potential. So to become an oak tree is the telos, or the end goal, that is inherently given to an acorn by natural law. And this telos, or end goal, is that an acorn is to realize its form, to become one with its ideal internal blueprint. And this is what we mean by the purpose of things in nature is to become itself. That is, an acorn, its purpose is to become itself, meaning that it is to realize its potential form that exists within it. And when it does that, it has reached its telos, or its end goal, as given it to it by natural law. Now, how is this relevant to our understanding of Plato's theory of the good life? Well, like everything else in nature, human beings also have an inherent purpose or function to become itself. So just as acorns are born to develop into the ideal oak tree, humans are born to develop into ideal adult human beings. But what does an ideal adult human being look like? Well, stay tuned because we're going to talk about that in our next lecture.